Hi to our viewers watching us live today. Welcome to The Real Talk Show. I'm your host, Daquan Smith. The question of the day is, should teens be pardoned from life in prison? According to the Supreme Court Justice, Elena Kagan, she believes that putting teens behind bars for life without any parole prevents them from being connected in their social life. She also wants people to consider the fact how immature teens fail to understand the consequences from their actions. From the Miller versus Alabama case, the Supreme Court in 2012 ruled that mandatory sentences of life without the possibility of parole are unconstitutional for juvenile offenders. So, how severe are we talking about the types of crimes they would commit? Well, rape and murder, etc. These are the type of horrific crimes we don't consider adolescents capable of committing. A major issue of the juvenile justice system is that approximately 2,500 offenders who are serving sentences of life without parole for crimes committed as juveniles, all of whom were convicted of homicide-related offenses. One of the recent cases, two teenage boys, Leno, who's 18, and William, who's 17, were both convicted for kidnapping and raping two girls at Rancho Penasquitos Park in San Diego, have been sentenced to 50 years to life in prison. As for Leno, he was charged an additional 8 years for being armed with a knife during the rapes. But despite how severe their actions were, the judge ruled not to give life without parole to either of the defendants. The conflicting issues of the juvenile system is that they determine a teen's sentence to life in prison all comes down to their age and the severity of the crimes they commit. Today, I am inviting three guest speakers, Paul Thompson, Jennifer Jenkins, and Gail Garinger, to discuss their views on the controversial issue. Hello, I'm with Paul Thompson, who disagrees with teens being tried as adults. Assistant Professor of Neurology at the University of California, Los Angeles. Thank you for being here today, Paul.
Thanks for having me, Daquan.
So let's go straight to the questions. So do you think juveniles should be tried as adults?
I personally don't think juveniles should be tried as adults, despite of the severity of the crime committed.
But why do you think they shouldn't be, Thompson?
Well, because juvenile brains aren't as developed as an adult's, let's say. They can't comprehend the consequences of a crime committed.
How do you think juveniles' brain isn't as developed than adults' brain?
Well, my research team at the University of California, Los Angeles collaborated with the National Institute of Health in the development of technology to map brain growth in juveniles. We scanned the brain of individuals from the ages of 3 years to 20 years to create a movie of some sort.
It's terrific that you created such a technology to take pictures of the brain, but what are the beneficial results of the technology?
Well, with this technology, it can show the growth of the brain over the years. For example, parts of the brain that are responsible for language and mathematics grow when you get older. But what we found interesting was that the growth of the brain, there is massive amounts of brain tissue loss. Gray matter, which is associated with thinking and emotion, is decreasing at a rate of 1 to 2% each year.
How does the information relate to the topic, Thompson?
With less gray matter in the brain, portions of the frontal lobes that inhibit these violent passions, rash actions, and regulate our emotions are very immature, making it very effortless to manipulate these juveniles to do whatever we want.
Very interesting information.
If we put a child into solitary confinement, for example, since their brain is still developing, it's a rather frightening, traumatizing, and stressful experience for juveniles in isolation. As Professor Craig Henley at the University of California, Santa Cruz would say, these traumatic experiences can interfere with and damage these essential developmental processes, and the damages may be irreparable.
Wow, I never thought about it that way before. Thank you once again, Paul. Now let's talk to Gail Granger, who is a former judge from Massachusetts. Hello, Gail. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Hi, my pleasure.
So where do you stand on this issue?
I am with the majority that juveniles convicted with murder shouldn't get life in prison. I believe that the best time to decide whether someone should spend their entire life in prison is when he has grown to be an adult, not when he is still a child.
Why do you think that?
Because as a former juvenile court judge, I have seen firsthand the enormous capacity of children change and were able to turn themselves around. Kids who committed crimes through peer pressure are more likely to be promising candidates for rehabilitation.
What evidence can you provide to our audience?
Young people are biologically different from adults. There have been researches on the teen brain that parts of the brain responsible for controlling thoughts, actions, and emotions are not fully developed.
All right, Mr. Thompson had talked about his research on teens' brain earlier during the show.
Indeed, and nationwide there have been 79 young adolescents sentenced to die in prison. This doesn't happen to children anywhere else in the world.
Interesting. So, in your article, you talked about the super predator theory. What is that?
It was persistently promoted in the mid-1990s by a political scientist named John Giulio. It is a theory that a young youth who repeatedly commits crimes as a result of being raised without morals.
Why is the super predator theory significant?
It is significant because in a retro report video by the New York Times explained that Giulio had a prediction that crime rates will increase in young adolescents and was confident that the results by the mid-2000s will prove his theory. However, he was wrong. Crime rates actually decreased by the mid-2000s. He tried to take back his theory, but the theory itself went out of control when law enforcement got involved. They wrongly assumed that deterrence and the incapacitation are the only ways to change the behavior of young people, and that any teenager who commits a crime is a hardened sociopath.
Do you think people still believe in this theory today?
I think that many who promoted the super predator theory have acknowledged that their prediction was wrong. They now may disregard the theory and feel regret. Many criminologists are trying to ask the court to ban teens being given life without the possibility of parole for convicted murderers.
That's great. Thank you for sharing your insight.
Thank you for having me.
Now with our third guest, I invited Jennifer Jenkins, who is a high school teacher and a sister who was a victim of juvenile crime. Welcome, Jennifer, to the talk show.
Thank you for having me.
What is your view on the Supreme Court ruling?
I disagree with the Supreme Court's ruling. The option to try juveniles as adults and sentence them to life should remain a viable option.
Would you mind explaining why you disagree?
When it comes to the topic of juvenile life without parole, most of us will readily agree that in the United States, human beings tried and sentenced as adults for murder at alarming rates. Where this argument usually ends, however, is on the question of brain development. The majority argues that teenagers' undeveloped brains are the reasons for these alarming rates, but that's just not the case. If brain development was a real issue, teen murder rates around the world would be roughly the same, but they aren't.
Do you have any statistics to support this?
Yes, well, for example, a study done in 1999 revealed that the United States ranked first in murders committed by youth among high-income OECD, which stands for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries.
Why does the United States have such high rates?
Here in the United States, we have a violence-loving culture. Adolescents are introduced to violent content in the form of television shows, movies, video games, etc. from a young age. In regards to violent video games, a study done by Craig Anderson, director of the Center for the Study of Violence at Iowa University, showed that students who played more hours of violent video games in a week tend to be more aggressive and hostile than those who didn't.
How so?
For example, when asked if it was okay for a boy to hit a classmate, they said something negative about him. The students who played more violent video games answered yes. The study also found that those students were also more likely to fantasize about hitting someone they didn't like.
Very interesting. And you believe this affects the amount of crimes committed?
Yes, I do.
Any final comments you'd like to make?
Yes, well, when it comes to this debate, victims and the family of victims are often left out. The trauma inflicted upon them is something that should not be left over. They deserve justice, so if a judge decides to sentence juveniles to life, they should be able to do so.
Thank you, Jennifer, for coming on this show.
It was my pleasure.
Hello, we just got a call from Scott Anderson. He was an American novelist and journalist for the New York Times and various other publications. He wants to be interviewed about this issue, so he will be joining us last minute today. And from what I heard, he got some interesting info for us. Welcome, Anderson, to the Real Talk Show.
Hello, my pleasure.
So, Anderson, where do you fit in the debate on the Supreme Court ruling?
I'm with the majority, and I believe that juveniles sentenced with murder should get the possibility of parole and not be sentenced to life. I believe that juveniles have the ability to reform themselves into better functional members of society, as I have seen it firsthand myself.
Oh, really? Care to explain?
I had the opportunity the past few years to interact with and speak with Greg Ousley, a juvenile prosecuted for the parricide back in 1994 of his mother and his father.
Oh my, was it frightening?
No, not in the slightest. We got along very well. But it did allow me to figure out a crucial cause on why juveniles may lash out and make rash decisions like Greg Ousley did.
Go on.
Jennifer Jenkins, I believe, stated prior that we live in a violence-loving culture here in the United States. Children are exposed to this kind of stimulus all throughout their lives through various forms of media, be it social media or in the movies. And to this point, I completely agree. It's a very strong argument to be made, and you can very well see it in our everyday life. But I do not believe this violence-loving culture can justify the life sentences that we give to juveniles, as I believe that they can change.
Do you have any evidence to support this?
To give a more recent example, let's take Terry Ray. Terry Ray was a juvenile who grew up on the south side of Chicago, which is obviously not the best place to grow up. As a result, he was introduced to violence from a very young age and constantly got into fights at the age of 11, and was repeatedly thrown into juvenile center after juvenile center. Over time, Ray's life deteriorated to the point where he started bringing weapons to school, fighting with students and teachers, living on the streets, and he was so angry that he says he easily could have killed somebody. But Ray eventually landed in St. Charles Youth Center, which was a juvenile rehabilitation center. And from there, it wasn't the smoothest of rides, as Ray still committed offenses such as theft and gun possession. But however, Ray changed. And it wasn't the system itself, but it was the counselors who touched his heart and inspired him to change eventually, as he eventually became a federal prosecutor and a criminal defense lawyer. He's also now a mentor to juveniles and believes that those who took the time out of his day to show him that they cared about him was what changed him. So, it's all about change,
Interesting. Any other points you'd like to refute?
I'd like to say something about those life incarcerations, which I'm sure aren't in any way cheap, as the New York Times reports that the average taxpayer in the United States pays around $31,286 per inmate housed in jail every single year. And if you add that up to something like a lifetime sentence, you're looking at some huge figures that could easily be put in something more meaningful. Another figure that the Vera Institute of Justice found was that in a study of 2012, the cost of prison in 2010 of the 40 states that participated was around $39 billion. So yeah, I really feel like we could place that money somewhere else.
Alright, nice. Anything you'd like to say, Mr. Anderson, to our viewers?
No, that's it. I'm done.
Well, thank you so much, Anderson, for appearing on our show last minute. It was great information from you. If you care about this issue, please share this video, vote, or contact your senator or representative to tell them how you feel about juveniles being tried as adults for their crimes. I am your host, Daquan Smith, and this is The Real Talk Show.